If you head away from the hustle and bustle of the Piazza San Marco in Venice, you'll head into the stranger, more magical part of Venice. It's in the tangle of narrow streets and courts that you enter the realm of Venetian legend. It's difficult to know how many of these stories have any basis in fact. One legend sees the devil face off with legendary composer Vivaldi. Another sees the devil try to snatch the soul of the first person to cross the Rialto Bridge, a bridge he created. Yet another involves a fisherman and his mermaid bride, which I actually covered in Rebel Folklore. And I have also covered some Venetian creepy ghost stories before. But this next legend even has physical evidence to testify to its occurrence. Or does it? Let's explore the legend behind the carvings found on a fabulous building in Castello in this episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. We are continuing with our European cities theme, and I am taking us back to Venice again. I love Venice. I have been 3 times, so it's a little bit easier to find stuff. And one of the problems that I had with one of the cities I was going to do was when I started doing research, I discovered that a lot of the websites were just advertising walks in that particular city and they weren't actually relating any stories. One story I found, I could literally only find it on this one website, which makes me wonder how well known it actually is. Or was somebody told this story for a laugh and they thought it was a genuine piece of folklore? I don't know. And this is part of the problem, I think, because it's only really been more recently that I've actually started going to these cities with an agenda in mind of, oh, I'm going to Dublin, so I'm going to see these places, or, oh, I'm going to Florence, I'm going to see these places. And that then means I can take photos and I can go to these places on your behalf, gather the piece of folklore and, actually experience the place as it is. And I didn't always do that in previous places. So that is why I'm starting to hit a bit of a brick wall with some of these cities that I've been to. So again, when it comes to next week, it's going to probably be either Madrid, Porto, or Stockholm, but it's going to depend on which ones I can find enough legends and so on for. And that was why I decided to just simply go back to Venice again, because this is one of the ones where I did actually find the story in a book and went looking for it. So I do actually have photos on the blog. If you're watching on YouTube, some of those photos will be on the screen, but it does mean that I have actually gone looking for where this story actually happened, and that's why I thought I would include it here, because it's a pretty interesting story. It does appear on other websites, so it's not just simply in this one book. And I thought that would be a good thing for us to have a look at, because I love it where there's a story has become attached to explain the presence of something where it maybe shouldn't be. And that's always kind of the preserve of folklore, really. So there we go. So for this particular story, we need to head to the Campo Santi Giovanni e Paolo in the Castello district, which is at the north of Venice. So if you're looking at Venice on a map, it's basically literally up at the top. And the square itself is home to the huge Basilica dei Santi Giovanni e Paolo, which is St. John and Paul. And here, the names John and Paul actually refer to obscure Christian martyrs, not the apostles or indeed Beatles. So completed in the 1430s, it is one of Venice's largest churches. But that is not why we're here. It's the building next door that we're interested in. And this is the Scuola Grande di San Marco. And it is literally phenomenal. I remember when I walked around the corner into the square, because I knew where I was looking for, and I was just like, wow, it's really, really beautiful, really quite ornate, and it's just gorgeous. Now, the Scuola was one of Venice's 7 great schools or public institutions, and the Scuola Grandi actually organised processions. They would distribute money and food to the community, bury paupers, and also supervise the hospitals. Now, the Scuola Grande di San Marco was one of the original 4 scuole, and then obviously others were added as well. Founded in 1260, the Scuola needed to be rebuilt after a devastating fire in 1485. Now, it is also part of Venice's city hospital, complete with ambulance boats berthed in the neighbouring canal, which I thought was fascinating because obviously when you go to Venice, obviously there are pedestrian walkways, but you obviously don't really see vans or cars or anything, because there's just basically nowhere for them to go. And you do then sort of go, hang on a minute, how does anybody get ambulances and so on around Venice? The same way they transport everything else, by water, which is quite cool. Now, the scuola also houses a small medical museum, and to find it, it's not the easiest, because I went in the main entrance and basically walked into the hospital itself, and the guy on reception was really confused. So you actually go in the main doors and then you go up the stairs immediately to the right. And I actually reviewed the museum on Atlas Obscura if you are interested in learning more about it. It is quite interesting if you like old anatomical equipment and things like that, but they do also have some beautiful frescoes which make it worth seeing anyway, and it's just the sheer number of books that they've got. And they do actually have one of Andreas Vesalius's books, which I was really excited to see, but that's because he's like my favourite anatomist. And honestly, who doesn't have a favourite anatomist? But anyway, so you're here for folklore, not me waxing lyrical about medical museums. So, this particular story. It starts with a man named Chesco Pizzigani, who is a talented stonecutter. Now, as far as I can make out, he did exist, and his hands supposedly created the perspective effects on the right-hand side of the facade. These panels are known as trompe-l'oeil, which is an optical illusion designed to make a two-dimensional space look like it is three-dimensional. They're more often found in paintings, so finding some in stone was a bit of a surprise. You do sometimes find them in places like churches and so on, so panels will look like there's a lot of depth to a wall, as in like maybe pillars will look like they're coming out towards you and the panels between them are receding away. But if you actually look at the wall, it's completely flat. And when you see them done well, it really does kind of mess with your perspective, but it's very effective. And as I say, it was very interesting to see them done in stone. Now, I don't really know how much of the phenomenal portico Chesco created personally. Some sources claim that the sculptor brothers Tullio and Antonio Lombardo, who were the sons of architect Pietro Lombardo, who designed the scuola, created the panels. But the portico is astonishing no matter who made it. Like, it is genuinely, genuinely stunning. But anyway, back to Chesco. According to the Venetian legend, Chesco's wife Florinda fell ill in 1501. Obviously, medical care was a lot more rudimentary at the time, and obviously that's especially the case with fewer means for diagnosing illnesses. Chesco near bankrupted himself in search of a cure, even selling his shop in the process. Sadly, none of the cures worked, and Florinda passed away. Grieving the loss of his wife and now destitute into the bargain, Chesco resorted to begging on the steps of the Scuola Grande di San Marco. Now, I can't even imagine how galling it must have been to actually ask for money beside the artistry that you had created. However, it would make sense to return there because their remit was distributing aid to the poor, so you can understand why he would find himself back there. To pass the time, Chesco scratched pictures into the marble using an old nail. Now, boats passed along the canal, offloading their goods into the square, much as they still do, and one of his drawings of such a ship is still visible on the marble. We'll never know what cargo the boat actually carried, but it does give a tiny insight into how bustling Venice was in earlier centuries. Also, if you remember when I did the Church Curiosities episode, I did mention there are churches in Ireland in particular where people were carving ships and boats and things into parts of the church as a means of giving aid or protection to these boats while they were off on journey. So it does make me wonder if there was something a little bit more behind that particular carving, or if Chesco was literally just drawn what he saw. I don't know. But I do say that the carving is still visible. I mean, they are difficult to spot. I must have looked like a right weirdo just loitering outside the main door, just peering at marble for about 10 minutes. And I got very excited when I finally found the carvings. Although, thankfully, I'm also no stranger to looking weird when I'm out and about. But as I say, you can see the outline of a ship on the portico. But of course, every legend needs a villain. And well, it's not simply here because an out-of-work stonemason carved a boat onto a pillar, because that would be cool. But oh no, there's so much more to it than that. So it seems that a Venetian woman nearby had given birth to a son some years earlier. His father was a Turkish man, and he's often referred to in retellings of the story as a Levantine because he came from the Levant region that became the Ottoman Empire in later centuries, but is also referred to just simply as being from Turkey. So the Turkish man lived on the island of Giudecca with other wealthy merchants from a similar background. The son lived with his father, even dressing in the same Turkish fashion, and he would occasionally pay visits to Castello to see his mother. He did struggle with his identity, being half Venetian and half Turkish, and it seems neither community fully accepted him, and he blamed his mother for his inability to belong. Strangely, he apparently didn't blame his father, who had had no problems fathering a child with a woman who was not his wife. Now, being a temperamental sort, which, if we're being generous, could explain why neither community wanted much to do with him, not where he was from, the son frequently beat his mother during violent outbursts, and his mother put up with them because she loved her son so much. Sadly, one night he went too far. In a fit of rage, he stabbed his mother in the chest and even tore out her heart. Sanity finally took hold of him, and the results of his horrifying actions dawned on him. Driven by shame, guilt, fear, maybe all three, he dropped the knife and fled from her small home, still clutching her heart. He ran towards the bridge beside the scuola grande di San Marco, but he tripped on the first step. His mother's heart flew from his hand, bouncing on the ground before it rolled away. And if that wasn't horrific enough, a voice rang out in the square, coming from the heart. "My son, are you hurt?" It was his mother's voice, still showing care for her son despite his turn to matricide. Grief-stricken, and hopefully overcome with guilt by this point, the murderer dashed away along the Fondamenta Mendicante away from the square. Upon reaching the Fondamenta Nove, which is the really long boulevard that runs along that edge of Venice looking out across the water, he threw himself into the waters facing the Isola di San Michele. This particular island now acts as the city cemetery, so it's a fairly apt spot for self-annihilation. But according to the legend, Chesco the beggar saw everything from his perch on the scuola steps. It's unclear if he did anything to intervene, although by that point there was very little that he or anyone else could do. Some retellings of the story also see him as being too weak and hungry to act. But Chesco did do what he knew how to do. He scratched the scene into the marble beside him, freezing the tragic moment in time. If you look really hard, and I did, you can still see a small figure wearing a turban, and in his hand rests the heart of his mother. That's not all. On cold nights, so the legend goes, the murderer still prowls the square. His sad moans are the only sound that ring out in the silent piazza. Many believe that he continues to search for the warmth of his mother's love. If you do find yourself in Venice and you would like to find the carvings, you do need to go right up to the portico of the scuola. Don't worry that you're going to look weird. I did it, it's fine, no one minds. And as you're looking at the doors, you should look to your right, and you will see a pillar with an artwork on it, and this basically depicts three cherub-like figures and a bull. If you walk past that and then look at the bare marble of the doorway itself, you will find the ships and the figure carved there. Now, obviously, who knows if such a legend is actually true. I will say that the old scratch drawings do give it a certain air of authenticity, because they obviously had to come from somewhere. And besides which, the carving of a figure holding a heart is specific enough that something must have happened for someone to then capture it in stone. Because obviously, remember, carving something into stone takes time and effort, and you're quite unlikely to do that on a whim. However, we also don't know if they were added in the 16th century, as the story would suggest. We don't know if they were added much later. There's really no way to know when they were actually added to the building. Now, plenty of people do believe that Chesco Pizzigani actually existed, and while the story to explain the carvings might seem fanciful, anything obviously is possible where Venice is concerned. So a lot of that story did come from Alberto Toso Fe's book Venetian Legends and Ghost Stories, which I've used before on the podcast. It's very, very good, and I like the fact he takes you on like little walks around Venice, which is pretty much how I ended up interacting with the book. So I would take myself out and follow one of the walks of an evening. But it was a really interesting way to then engage with the city beyond the obvious. And this is the thing, I love Venice, I really, really do. It's one of my favourite places. But once you get away from St. Mark's Square and all the tourists and things like that, you do start finding much more interesting little points and things like that. And St. Mark's Square is gorgeous, don't get me wrong. But if you're looking for folklore, there are obviously lots of other places that you can find it in and around the city, which is cool. So I hope you enjoyed that particular story and that particular instalment of these European ghost stories from Venice this time. Well, again, really, because the last time I did it was actually 2023. I thought I'd done it more recently, but apparently not. Like I say, next week we are going to be having a look at Porto, Madrid or Stockholm, depending on what I can find about each one of them. So we shall see. And again, one of the reasons why I'm picking the cities that I am is it depends on whether I've actually been to the city or not, and if there is actually enough folklore to justify an entire episode. So there is some kind of method behind how I'm picking the cities that I am. I did want to include a ghost story though, because we are gearing up towards Ghosts Month, which is going to be August, and that's to celebrate the publication of Ghost Lore, the follow-up to Rebel Folklore, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what people make of that and how people receive it compared to Rebel Folklore, because obviously Rebel Folklore did so well and people really enjoyed it, and I think Ghost Lore, if you like that kind of collection of figures in one place, you like Ghost Lore, but this one's obviously got darker figures in, and they're not necessarily going to be that grey area between benevolent and malevolent. Some of these are just downright nasty, but we do have a couple of nice ones in there as well for balance, so I hope that you enjoy that. But anyway, the link to pre-order Ghost Lore is below if you'd like to, so I just thought I'd let you know about that as well. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.